around, whatever the case may be. And we'll get started here today. Move this over between. Let's start with a prayer this morning. Father, we thank you for your presence with us this morning, and we just ask that you be with us as we think about our families, as we think whatever age they are, Lord, children, how you want us to be involved in their lives, how you want them to be involved in our lives, for your glory and your honor and your praise. We haven't started yet, so come on in. Did you need something, Don, before we...
The wireless mic.
The wireless mic's right there.
Can I have you wear that so we can record while you're
okay.
more here?
Okay. We're still accommodating the high-tech folks here.
Interrupters here.
Oh, man, here.
Just call us the nuisance people is what we are.
Okay.
Now we'll get you on tape for these people that couldn't make it.
Okay. Get this going. Did everybody get a worksheet? Didn't get a worksheet. There's some more here. A couple more there? Sure. Person in the back there, that's great. Let's see if I can manage to get totally tangled up in this cord here. Okay, we'll see how this goes. Stuff it in there and get it out of the way. Okay, everybody's got a worksheet. Yesterday we were talking about the idea of family, your family legacy, faith or faction. And as we looked at the lives of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, Jacob's sons, Joseph's brothers, we looked at the illustrations there of faith and illustrations of faction. And this morning's lecture by Mike Armour of faction that happens in amazing, utterly amazing, that God all the faction that was going on. Have you ever noticed that in the Old Testament? Particularly in those families. All these things that are going on, but somebody, like in this case Esau, comes forward. He takes the risk. He goes for reconciliation instead of what the flesh would tell him to go for retribution. And then there is reconciliation, there is faith, the generation, the family is preserved, and they move on. And so many times that is exactly what is true today with families, our families maybe, families in our churches. And what can we do? This is the question that I hope to address and to look at today. What can we do in a practical, hands-on sort of way to address this problem of family faction in our country, in our society? It's everywhere. I just sat down and thought of some ways that faction is manifested in our families today in this country. Child abuse, divorce, sexual abuse, rape, murder, homosexuality, prostitution. These are examples of the problem. The problem being that family faction is such a rampant problem in our country today. Why is faction so rampant in our country? Well, the flesh. Satan's influence in the world is there. But beyond that, why? I want to suggest to you today that the reason that family faction is so rampant, even among families who attend church, is because there has been a failure to apply biblical principles to daily life. So many times there have been attempts made to apply some scripture to lives. But so many times a passage is lifted out and it's just kind of handed to somebody who's in grief, who's just lost a son or a daughter. Well, all things work together for the good of those that love him. are called according to his purposes. And I'm not arguing with that truth of that verse, but maybe I'm arguing with the application in the particular setting. And there are some principles of Scripture that we need to look at. Brought up yesterday by a person who isn't here today, and he was talking about God's patience with us. Remember, we were talking about Abraham going down to Egypt and telling the lie about Sarah, and then going over into the Philistine country with Abimelech and telling the lie about Sarah, and then later Isaac going to Abimelech, telling the lie about Rebekah. Over and over, God's people have failures. But God doesn't just write them off. Because of that, He stays with us. He allows us the opportunity to grow in faith, to grow in obedience. It's a principle that exists in many, many examples throughout Scripture. And so it's a little bit more difficult than just saying, turn to Joshua 3:5, and this says this, and so boom, do it. In fact, there's two models of learning that have been used. The first model, on that line A there, the first blank, you can just kind of go across with these three steps. Look at it, accept it, do it. That's been the model. Society that is very structured and very heavy on I'm told, so I do, that model can work in that setting. But that isn't the culture that we live in today. Maybe some of that's bad, maybe some of that's good, though. There is another model, though, that I think is a very viable model, a very viable approach for us in using to talk about in applying the principles of the Bible to our lives. Not just putting them up on a screen and saying, okay, here's the principles, here's the Ten Commandments are great. It's just that nobody can keep them, can they? Have you kept the Ten Commandments? I don't think anybody has. This kind of sounds like Paul in the book of Romans, doesn't it? The problem, and yet many times the application of the law has been do it, do it, do it, or else you're bad, bad, bad. And people get burned in the process of that. People get fried in the process of that. Since I've been working in family counseling, I don't know how many dozens of people I've seen that have just been destroyed, chewed up, and spitten out by the church system. Not by God, not by the Bible even, but by the church system that they were a part of. And so, Model B, I want to suggest to you, and this for our children as well, teenagers, college-age young people. They need to examine something. Examine it. That's kind of like looking at it, but it's a little bit closer range. Looking at it is kind of like it's up on the wall over there. Examine it is it's like it's right here. And then after you examine it, you explore it. And by explore it, what I'm after examining it, after we've seen what is there, we look at the ramifications. What happens in people's lives when they do this? What happens in people's lives? Does that make sense? And then, after examining it, exploring it, then apply it. How does it fit my life? Thou shalt not kill. I don't know about you guys, but I rarely have the opportunity to kill somebody. But Jesus said, in the sermon, brother, you're guilty of murder, doesn't he? And I think that many times in the church what we are guilty of is doing the very same thing that the Pharisees did in Jesus' day. And that is, they had watered the law down so much that guess what? It was keepable. They could keep the law. Not the real law, but the law that they had arrived at by watering down the real law. And so it was keepable. They could go around saying, hey, I keep the law. What's wrong with you? Why don't you keep the law? And that was a problem. I think that many times that's a problem with us. Maybe not us, but in the church system. Applying, hoping that we will do today. So what is the solution? I'm going to suggest to you that there is a 5-step process that is basically a problem-solving process. Number 1, you identify. And we're talking about transmitting our values to the next generation, essentially, to our families. The first step in that process is identifying. And in parentheses over there, you can put content. What are my values? Over to the right over there, you see a little heading there that says my values with a list underneath it. And yesterday, as we were going through the book of Genesis, looking at the values of the people there, we identified a number of values. But I think that one thing that we have to do, and the first thing that we have to do if we want our values to be effectively transmitted in our families, lived out in our families, upheld in our families, is we have to identify what are our values here. What are the things that we really hold near and dear to us? This doesn't matter if we're talking about just a couple, a husband and wife, or if we're talking about parents and children, or a single parent and children, or grandparents and children and grandchildren. What are my values? What do I really want? And the beautiful thing about this is, and the beautiful thing about God is, that it's never too late to start. Never. It's never too late to start. If you're still alive, there's plenty of time. So, first thing is identify. What are my values? The second thing is to make a plan. Make a plan. That's the application part. Okay, what am I going to do to help these values get into my family? And we're going to get into that a little bit more, but I want to go on through the steps of this process because many times that's where we stop, isn't it? We say, okay, what are my values? Okay, what's my plan? Okay. And then it stops there. You'd be surprised how many people in family counseling, they come in with a problem, and I say, okay, what's the problem? Okay, this is the problem. Okay, how do you want things to be? Well, this is how we want things to be. And I say, okay, well, what do you think we should do to get from where you are now to where you want to be? And they come up with several plans, and I say, okay, which plan do you think is the best plan? And they say, well, we think this will work best. And I go, okay, now what? And they say, what do you mean, now what? We haven't done anything yet, have we? The next to action at the number of people that come up with all kinds of different plans about different things. It never gets into action. It never happens. The next 2 steps followed. Are any of you involved or have been involved in business ventures? Okay, so we're not a lot of business people here. That's okay. Those of you that have been involved in business know this next step here, so I'm going to let you guys. What do you do after you put a plan into action? What do you do? Help us out.
Because when you raise the question, does it work?
Yeah, exactly. Now the word that I have in my list here, you can put whatever word you want down because the word isn't as important as what you do, and that is evaluate it. Is it working? Now, obviously, if you're selling widgets and you want to know if a particular campaign program to ad campaign is working to sell those widgets, you don't just run it one day and wait and see if it worked, do you? You have a certain length of time, and you have different parameters involved in that deciding if it works. But looking to see if it works, you'd be surprised the number of people that just implement a plan and just go, okay, we've got a plan, now we're going to do it. And that's it. Never a second thought, is this working? That's a very important part of the process. The fifth thing is then to modify the plan, maybe so that it works because it isn't working, or maybe even so that it works better. Okay? It works better. Now those are just 5 simple steps. Now I encourage you, right to the left of that 5, draw a little curved arrow back up to number 3. Because this is what is known as a recursive process. You go back through it again and again and again to modify, to refine, to make it better. Okay? Now, what are the rules about how values are transmitted from one person to another? I want to get some input from you, and I will restate these for the camera, for the video. What do you think are the important things that are needed to be in place if one person's values are going to be accepted by another person? What has to be there? What would you guess? Because this is what you think. And that's the question.
Has to be some listening involved, I would say.
Okay. Some listening, so some sharing of information and some listening to that information. Okay. Okay. Somebody else. I'm sorry.
It has to be a value that you really put in your own life. You can't transmit something that you don't believe or you haven't really worked on it yourself.
Okay. Very good. Very good. It has to be something that is a part of the life of the one who is trying to transmit that.
And probably as important as anything else is there be a definite understanding that there's concern and interest and there's mutual interest here.
Okay. Okay, so it's meaningful to the person who's learning it. Does that usually generate interest? I mean, if it's not meaningful to me, I don't really care what your value is. Okay, I think you had something. No?
Basically, just
Okay.
have an interest in the person that you want to communicate with.
Okay, so an interest in the person too. I think that's different. I think that's very good. Yes. Yes, so there's all these things that are involved. And you know what these things are all called by the social scientists is the word bonding. And I'd encourage you, there's a little blank right in the middle of those circles there. Just write the word bonding in there. Bonding. And bonding means essentially an identification with another person. That I am connected to that other person. They're important to me. I'm important to them. We are bonded. Question or comment?
And that bonding is the initial thing. That's the initial thing that happens when new life comes about. There's a bonding. And things grow from that point.
Mm-hmm. And so this bonding really, since it begins at the point of birth between mother and child, is the first bond that any of us have ever experienced. It's something that grows, not something that somehow has to initially be created. It's something that is there at the beginning of life and then has the opportunity to grow. But many times what happens in our families is that bonding gets kind of cut off. Not because we intend for it to be, but just because that's the way we get cut in on by the things of life. Sometimes we get bad information about how to relate to each other either as husband, wife, or as parent and child. In the middle of those interlocking circles there have to do with the process of how bonding occurs. And the major thing there is that there has to be an opportunity for participation. I think it'd be helpful to you, for the purpose of giving some examples here, of talking about the different arenas. Each one of those circles represents an arena where values are transmitted. And you can put them in whichever order, but in one of those circles, put the word play. Play. That's one of the arenas where bonding occurs. Another one is work. So bonding occurs in play, bonding occurs in work. Where would you guess, what would you guess the third major arena where bonding occurs is? Any ideas? Suffering. Suffering. If you want people to be bonded together as a group, if you want a youth group to really come together, first of all, you might have them play together. You know, go to the river, go to a ball game, play volleyball. They play together. They have fun together. That's kind of a starting level of bonding. And it is in our families too. And one of the things that I would include as play in our families is eating together. Eating together, a pleasurable activity together. And we eat together and we talk and we enjoy one another's company. So that's play. Then if you want to further bond, say, a youth group together or a family, you get them working together towards some common goal. Say, a widow lady in the congregation. Teenage groups just come together and bond around an experience like that when I was working with youth. But if you really want to bond a group together, you have them be attacked by an outside force that is attacking them because of their connection to each other. Now, many times, that is an activity or an occurrence that breaks bonds. But it is never a neutral experience. It either bonds people closer together or they fly apart under suffering. And many times not in the experience itself of suffering, but later. Later, as they look back and they say, boy, remember when we were just being under the gun there? And I've experienced this recently in my own family. About a month ago, my sister-in-law was killed in a tragic car accident. Head-on collision, several people killed. And that's the first major loss in my immediate family. My sisters, none of my wife's sisters and brothers, none of our parents have died. Our grandparents have died, but we weren't really that close to them in the sense of being around them a lot. But this was an occasion of suffering. And I've seen that family already begin to bond, the ties to family members, aunts, uncles, cousins, nieces, nephews, come together in situations of suffering and loss. And that bonding has to be there if values are going to be transmitted. This little model here, this play, work, suffering model, I'm not encouraging you, by the way, to create situations of suffering. Those definitely come in our lives. We don't have to create those. But many times we do have to create especially in our society where the family is being pulled this way and that way and the other way. In fact, one reason that I'm not available to teach this class tomorrow morning is because of some things that I have built into our family around play and work. Play mostly. And that is that I coach my son's soccer team. He's in first grade. And that's a great way for parents to bond with their children. But notice what happens. There has to be participation, an opportunity for participation. Now, most kids at a young age want to be involved, don't they? Most couples early in their relationship want to be involved together. Okay, so you don't have trouble generating the desire for participation. The next step is where it gets tricky, and that's skills. How do you teach skills without discouraging participation? But the third item explains how best to teach skills while encouraging participation. You give recognition for when those skills are appropriate, when they are well displayed, when they are effectively exhibited in the situation. A kid wants to be involved in doing the dishes. Don't ask me why. I don't know why. But they want to be involved.
You got different children. I know.
At the age of 5, they didn't want to be involved in doing the dishes?
No, they're too little then.
See, that's the issue, isn't it? That's the issue, isn't it? Find according to their skill level. See, that may mean that we have to modify things. You know, maybe it's just, okay, you carry them over. Or I'll help you. But skill, being involved according to their skill level and getting recognition for those skills that are exhibited. That's a challenge. I never said that's easy. That's not easy. By the time they're 9, sometimes 8, if they haven't had the opportunity, if they haven't been taught the skills and recognized for having the skills, the same thing's true in a husband-wife relationship. And husbands that come to me for marital counseling. They get married. They want to be involved with each other. Maybe this particular, we'll say, husband doesn't have a lot of skills in verbal communication. And so there's not a lot of verbal communication to women. And then she gets the message that he doesn't, and some recognition for those skills. And then he's going to find a whole lot more enjoyment in participating in that activity. Well, that's a real oversimplification, okay? Because there's a lot of other things involved as well. But it's just an example of how skills, when they are recognized, encourage participation. And this really leads us into the next little line there. When and where does this begin? We're going to have to wrap up here. Running out of time. When and where does this begin? Over to the left of those 3 lines, put now. It has to begin now. Where does it begin? It can begin in any one of 3 types of relationships, and probably more than the 3 that I'm going to list for you. One is husband-wife relationship. It can begin in a husband-wife relationship. There don't have to be children present. In fact, it's better if values are beginning to be established and built into a family before children ever come. Between parents and children is the second relationship, second type of relationship. Between grandparents, I have my kids involved with their grandparents. I wasn't involved with my grandparents very much. I knew about them, I heard stories about them, but I didn't have a lot of personal involvement. In our culture today, and I think it's one of the great weaknesses of our culture today, because of the great mobility of our society and the moving around every 2 to 3 years, there tends to be not very much contact between grandparents and grandchildren in meaningful ways. And so that's a very important relationship, a relationship of play, a relationship or in an arena of play and an arena of work, and in an arena of suffering as well. Where does it end? It doesn't. It's an ongoing process. Never ends. Keeps being refined, keeps being expanded, keeps being explored to greater depths. What are my values? You see, we get into difficulties with our values because sometimes our values conflict with each other, like we were looking at Abraham when he went to Egypt. He had values that conflicted. He wanted to stay alive. But if he told the truth, he might die. They might kill him and take his wife. What's he going to do? He found what he believed, according to his plan, would keep him alive. So in that instance, staying alive was a higher value than telling the truth was for him. And so we're challenged in our daily lives between our values. And our society no longer, if it ever did, no longer supports a Christian value system. It just doesn't happen. I don't think it's happened since I was in grade school. And that was 30 years ago. Okay? Some people would say it hasn't happened in 20 years. Some people would say it hasn't ever happened. All I know is I don't think it's ever happened since I became conscious at about age 7. But our society does not support a Christian value system. If our children, if our families are to have Christian values, they will get them from us. And the only way they will get them from us is if we choose to build them in and to hand them down and to make them manifest in our families. Are there any last questions, closing questions, or comments anybody would like to make? Yes?
And I think that goes along with a lot of real struggles in family your age, my age, is that, not that others haven't, but you got to sacrifice what you want to do. I don't know if our day starts at 5, 6 o'clock in the morning. I went to bed at 2 o'clock this morning, and it was like that, step to step.
Mm-hmm.
And you got to learn how within that type of schedule fit those things in.
What are really going to be my values? The ones I live, not just the ones I talk about. Exactly. Thank you. Anyone else? Well, thank you for your attendance, and hope the Lord blesses you as you move forward in imparting your values, building your values in your family.